Welcome to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast, episode 12. Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today's episode is, if I can be biased, a really good one. We have the multi-talented artist and musician Ben Dewey. Ben is the fantastic artist between such graphic novels as I Was the Cat, The Autumnlands Tooth and Claw, the hilarious Tragedy series, web series, Beasts of Burden, and most recently some fantastic forework for Marvel. Ben's also an accomplished musician who can probably play circles around most people in the comics and music industry that I know. We had a really great discussion about the ills of social media, music, and the behind-the-scenes anxiety of creating comics and finding art styles. And we had some really nice, deep conversations. Well, I say conversations, but I've been fortunate enough in this show that I've had guests who are very well-spoken and eloquent and who are able to explain and discuss things that I both agree and am interested in very, very smart and detailed ways. Ben is no exception, so sorry if a lot of this podcast is me right after Ben says something nice and insightful saying, yeah, exactly. Apologies in advance. There's a quick little weird audio thing in the beginning. A lot of my fail-safes for recording failed, and thankfully Ben was recording a voice note for his end of the conversation, so I was able to splice him in pretty early on. So if you notice there's a quick little switch of his audio in the beginning, that's what happened, and hopefully it's not too distracting. I'd initially hoped to have some of Ben's music on the show, but unfortunately this whole pandemic crisis took his band out of the studio, and unfortunately there's nothing I can really share or show, but I can guarantee you once they're done it's going to be some rockin' stuff. Alright, let's do it. So when I was first doing this podcast, when I first started doing the first couple episodes, I opened with the question to everybody, comics, coffee, metal, what's kind of, what are you digging of each of those, or how'd you get your start with each of those? And when I had the long kind of, pause in between doing the show, I decided not to do it because it was kind of, kind of cheesy, but, everyone who I've interviewed since has been, hey, why are you going to ask me that? So... I'm like, all right, by, several people's demand, I'm bringing it back. So, Mr. Ben Dewey, comics, coffee, metal, what's doing it for you lately?
So my favorite coffee that I like to drink is Boyd's. It comes in a red bag, and I usually don't get it because, as a comic book artist, you never know where your next paycheck is going to come from. So
I've been hesitant to get anything that's fancy, so I've just been buying Folgers out of a big red tub. But recently I did a handful of jobs in a row that made it possible for me to drink fancy Boyd's coffee. So
nice.
That's as fancy as I get with that. But I drink about a pot a day, and it's my favorite because they served it at this sort of Greasy Spoon diner that I used to like to go to that was up the street from me and Lindsay's old apartment. So that's my favorite coffee. Comics, I've been reading a lot of good old Roy Thomas, John Buscema, Conan lately, and it's just so fun and exciting. And then there's all kinds of cool stuff that's coming out these days. I'm excited about Chris Samnee and his wife Laura's book that they're putting out from Oni that I think was scheduled for May, but I'm not sure with current circumstances what that'll be. But the preview pages of it look amazing.
Yeah, that looks like a real fun book.
Yeah, and then for metal, I don't know if this qualifies. I guess in the old school definition it does, but I've been really loving the album by The Darkness, the new one, Easter is Canceled. I didn't think I would be a Darkness fan, but man, that album is so fun, and like it just rips. Like there's moments in it that are beautiful and that feel honest despite their tongue-in-cheek delivery of a lot of stuff. So those would be my three.
Well, that with The Darkness, if you ask me, hey Don, do you think The Darkness is metal? I wouldn't say no. Mm-hmm. I think I've mentioned this many times before on the show. Metal is almost its like own like sector of music in that there's so many subgenres that just saying something's metal, it's like, what do you mean? Like Nightwish is metal, and that's like symphonic metal storytelling. And then you got stuff like Death, which is old school, originators of like death metal, and it's like it's all metal, but
yeah. This is why I feel like ultimately, like the kind of stuff I think about on a regular basis, because I like to listen to a lot of contemporary philosophers and neuroscientists, and how are we configured to think about ourselves. And I think this applies to music and applies to comics. As soon as you start trying to label it and button things down, you create the opportunity for contrast, which can be useful, but it can also be a thing that calcifies your opinion on any particular artifact or person. So I tend to embrace ideas for their utility, music for whatever qualities I like in context. And like you were just saying, it's such a broad thing that at a certain point it starts to not be useful as a qualifier. So like there's rock music, but then there's stuff on the edges of that like you've got this bell curve, and in the middle a lot of stuff could be considered rock, and then there's things that are either extreme that are super hard edged and super soft, and every genre has that, where you're just blending and getting these weird Venn diagram crossovers.
Yeah, I think
so. Yeah,
I definitely think like if you look, even if you're just to kind of like go to iTunes and just like sort by genres, if you go to any other genre, you're not going to see like as wide of a berth as like cattle decapitation, and then like The Sword.
Right.
Just,
like you can look at a thing and say, well, what is this not? Like that might be useful, but at a certain point, it's like it has overlap, some qualities that are shared between different things, but it's ultimately, it depends on what you're trying to do with it. I think we see this in social media, where people talk about things like what constitutes a fan.
Yeah.
And I always feel like that's such a not interesting conversation, because you let people like what they like. I don't feel like it's relevant. At a certain point, you're just trying to make the best things you can, and some people like a little bit of it, some people like it a lot, and if it has significance in a way that helps people experience life with some more joy, even a little bit, then I'm okay with whatever anyone makes, as long as it's not hurting somebody else.
Yeah, I totally agree, and we definitely share one very specific thing, in that a lot of people will say it's bad or technically not good, and it's something we both love dearly, and that's the movie Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
And it's whenever I see anyone kind of like crap on that movie a little bit or anything like that, I almost want to be defensive about it, but I'm like, you know what? They didn't like it. It wasn't for them. This movie happened to be completely for me. and I enjoy it, and I'm not gonna, I've gone down that road before myself, where it's like someone doesn't like something I liked, and I try to like, no, but you're not understand. It's like, well, they're not gonna get it if they didn't like it.
Right.
I'm not gonna change their mind, and all I'm doing is just frustrating myself with the idea that why don't you like this as much as I do?
Trying to defend your spouse from somebody who doesn't like them. And it's like, well, I don't know if I could swear, but F that person.
Yeah. You could swear. You could swear up and down. Actually, I'm trying to. I swear a little too much, so that's why I'm just trying to censor myself a little bit. But
it's like I just like the thing for what it is, and like there are people who I enjoy being around who were critical of it, and I was just like, hey, this is a thing I enjoy. It's not to your taste. I don't. If we're going to keep hanging out, please don't do that, because it doesn't you're not going to get anywhere with me trying to convince me that a thing I enjoy is bad. You might as well tell me that strawberries don't taste any good. Like I think they do, and it's highly subjective.
Yeah.
And I think I could make an objective case for why Pacific Rim is good and why Pacific Rim 2 is not good.
We both can. I know we both can.
What's that? I'm sorry?
Well, we definitely both can. And I've actually considered having a long tweet thread about why Pacific Rim is so good. But I'm like, I almost don't want to invite the people who disagree because I'm like, I don't care. And I don't want you to waste your time thinking I'm going to care about what you have to say.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the problem with social media, right? Is like I think that it creates a strange incentive structure where it'd be one thing if you would have these conversations with your friends, people who know you well and who have a sense of who you are in the context in which they know you. But on the internet, it's sort of like you're going into the town square with a megaphone and saying like, I love the Lego movie. And you're like, come at me. You know, like it's to a certain extent, there are going to be people who think they know you based on this one anecdotal thing you've put out into the world. And I think that is the danger of the mostly positive side of the internet that comes with interconnectedness, is that you get this sense of ownership. You get this sense of feeling like you can lock down who another person is and what they're about by looking at their profile and all these things you have to declare. And I think it gets us away from human communication, which has for most of human history been about reading facial expressions and body language and tone of voice. And then we moved it into this weird space where almost none of those things, for the most part, get showcased. So you get this strange half communication that, because it doesn't expose us to each other, we feel less vulnerable. Then, like, ironically, we open ourselves up hugely to other vulnerabilities we weren't paying attention to. And, like, you know, identifying yourself with the things you're a fan of, I think, is one of those vulnerabilities. Because then if somebody says, I hate Animal Crossing, then to a lot of people, they hear that as virtually the same thing as I hate you.
Yeah. It's the weird, you know, whenever I decide to tweet something or something that's just a general opinion of something I have, I always like kind of triple guess myself. Not because I feel like I'm going to get any type of weird backlash or anything. It's just like, well, do I need to say this? Like, does this need to be expressed, you know, on Twitter? And then it's like, well, it's social media, but like, it's really becoming less social and just more like,
well, you know,
it's really harkening back to,
I've probably
like,
brought this guy up before on other podcasts I've been on, but I think about what he says a lot. His name is Jaron Lanier, and he has written a bunch of books about the nature of how these things work. There's also a guy named Cal Newport, who I've listened to a handful of times, and I think their perspectives are pretty good. Jaron Lanier calls social media manipulation engines, because their goal is, you know, this thing that has a hidden quality. It's not insidious. It's just what algorithms do over time. Like, you might have remembered when there was some company, I forget who it was, who made this AI bot, who they just put it out in the world and it was going to try and interact with people on social media sites. And it didn't take long before it became like a racist Nazi.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I remember
because
that
that's the feedback it was getting. It was scanning, you know, big data and trying to interpret it appropriately. And when you look at the way that we interact in these spaces, and I don't feel bad bringing it up on multiple, you know, podcasts or interviews or whatever else, because I do think it's what we're going to be dealing with in the future, and it's partially why we're in the predicament we're in with the way we can't communicate with each other. And that has to do with the fact that we are voluntarily submitting ourselves to these essentially like mind control experiment of like, what is the purpose of engaging with this thing that's like slowly modifying your behavior? The nervousness you feel when you tweet, you know, like, well, did I word this correctly, or will somebody come for me?
Yeah.
And then what will the repercussions of that be? And then how often does it happen that if somebody is wrongfully accused of a thing, or, you know, you overstep your boundaries, people give you the space to redeem yourself, or like even that language feels weirdly hyperbolic given what we're talking about. You know, like, I think it's worth considering what the purpose is, and then continually reevaluating whether or not we want to keep using these venues to communicate.
You said what you're saying is like really a nice eloquent way of what I'm trying to put together in my own brain, which I've been fortunate in these past few episodes to have these really nice topics like this come up. Yeah. And my guests being so much better spoken than I on it.
Well, thank you.
And really kind of expressing my own, my like exact thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually kind of like, I've noticed you've kind of taken a step back from social media.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something like you're just not posting as much, but you're still kind of there, or if you're just kind of like, you know what, I'm setting this aside. I will look at it for 10 minutes, tweet what I got to tweet, and then move on with my day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that guy was mentioning Jaron Lanier, his book, I think it's called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. He does make an allowance for the idea that for some people it is untenable to delete your social media accounts because that is the way in which a lot of contemporary commerce is done. That's the way in which people are making professional contacts. And now, given our current circumstances where everybody's on lockdown, it really is this thing that's helping knit the world together in a way that if you didn't have that, like you can see how, historically other pandemics have played out when people weren't able to get information disseminated super quickly and, have the germane details filtered out as readily as possible. So I think there are really great things about it, but I also try and be aware of it in the same way that somebody who notices addictive tendencies, and I think we are all addicted to it because there are people who work at these companies who use neuroscience and the same methodology that the people who design slot machines use to manipulate human beings into using their platforms as much as possible. And you don't have to be devious to do it. You're just if the goal is to keep people engaged, then you can do that through randomized negativity, through a mix of negative reinforcement and positive reward every now and then. But it helps that it's randomized, right? And so like part of the reason I think, I don't know this for sure, but like the indications I have from the people I read strongly confirm it, is that part of the reason you don't see, these timelines in exactly the way that they have been written is that they want to be able to randomize it more. They want to be able to control more what kind of interactions you're having because they're selling a metric called time on site. And so, I think about this stuff only to the extent that I notice it affecting me, and then I try and make proactive choices about how I want to spend my day. Do I want to keep looking at Instagram? What value do I get out of scrolling for 10 minutes? If I'm looking at Twitter and I see some total stranger say a thing that lights up a negative aspect of my consciousness, and then I think and I'm thinking about that for the next 20 minutes. Why did I just let a stranger take 20 minutes of my life away from me? So I try and be cognizant of that to the extent that if I notice I'm being negative or if I'm allowing it to affect me in ways that are not helpful, then I do think it's good to step back, reevaluate, and then use it for what it's useful for. And so in my case, it's useful for making announcements about projects I'm doing or reaching out to friends and really trying to frame my usage of it.
Yeah, I
don't know if that's a helpful way to think of it.
No, that's a fantastic way to think about it because it's something that's crossed my mind a lot too. And I actually had like a real direct experience of what you're talking about recently when on the Twitter app, you can select either latest tweets first or home, where it's that completely random thing, and then they start threading comments. So you see comments from people who you don't follow, commenting on other people and all that. And I didn't notice that it switched back to that because I do latest tweets or whatever. And I was just like, what? Like, I just felt like I was having like this like negative oh God, why am I on Twitter? I hate this. Oh, but being comic book artists and creators and we need to have that, I guess, portal. And even though as time goes on, the need is getting bigger and bigger quotation marks in my brain.
Well, I mean, I think it's helpful to imagine a counterfactual where we have a different type of dynamic. And it is possible. It doesn't have to be this way. It isn't like, all right, well, you have, 4 fingers and a thumb on your hand. That's just the way that evolution shaped your body. This was a thing that we made. Just like monetary systems or governments or any of these other things, they're big, unwieldy, complicated structures that do, in some cases, adhere to Darwinian structure, where they emerge and they do whatever they can do to survive. But with the case of things like, corporations, or in this case, these media conglomerates or these big companies that control all this stuff, we are not obligated to continue to, at least yet, we're not obligated to continue to engage with them. People engage with Twitter, I would say, semi-voluntarily. And the only reason I say semi-voluntarily is because I think a lot of people are addicted to the rush of the randomization, the dopamine and serotonin uptake that comes with novelty. And, you keep engaging, like, well, what's new? What's happening? What's new? And the truth is like, you're kind of seeing, half of it, or maybe more than that, is not super relevant. You like what's the last thing you remember seeing on your Twitter feed? I think it becomes you're just like pulling a lever on a slot machine, and I think unless you're doing something with intention, I have that carved onto the back of my phone case. It says face down, where I try and think, why am I picking this up? What am I looking for? Can I engage with my world in a way that doesn't involve me going to the internet because I'm chasing that chemical experience in my brain? So I think it's helpful to know your own consciousness and try and get a sense of the prompt that you're feeling. Like, why did I just feel that prompt? Is it because I really need to know when Mark Knopfler was born? Or is it because I can, and I've been trained like a pigeon by B.F. Skinner? I'm like, it's worth paying attention to, and it's not all bad, but it is at this point now where we could lose control of it if we're not trying to be objective and standing apart from it and looking at it in a neutral way.
Yeah, and not to simplify what you're saying too much, I think a lot of it is just that fear of not of the. I'm not going to use the acronym people use, but the fear of missing out. Like,
oh, sure.
Like you didn't catch that funny thing someone said, or that crazy video that someone shared, or that cool piece of art, or things like that. And I've definitely felt that myself, and I think a lot of it just kind of, I know for me, when I notice an uptick in social media being, something I'm constantly looking at or checking or scrolling through, it's based on anxiety from myself.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's exactly what I'm saying, is that we are literally missing out on the fun of what's happening in like some random guy's house in Rio de Janeiro who's super awesome, who like has his friends over for board games. Like we don't notice that and think, oh, well, why am I not at Carlos's house playing, like Forbidden Island? But we know that a space like Twitter or Instagram has this cultivated feed of all this stuff that's people showing their highlight reels. And I think it's illusory, right? Because like you see that meme, but it's momentary. It's this way to chase away, anxiety, fear, our sense of our own irrelevance. But then I think the problem is we then judge ourselves by the best experiences other people are having, and then it perpetuates that cycle where we keep getting into the space. We're like, all right, well, maybe the next thing I scroll to will make me feel better. And there's that randomized negativity, like we sort of generated ourselves in some instances. And I think, the other thing is like we're missing out on the potential experiences of concentration in our own day-to-day life, where we're reading a book or trying to come up with a new idea, or focus on a thing that is less ephemeral, like getting better at drawing or getting better at guitar playing, where the reward is not as immediate, but the value in the long term it has larger cash value for our life. When you ask yourself, you're like, what do I really want to be good at? 10 years from now, if I could take all the time I spent scrolling through my Instagram feed and all the stuff I didn't remember, and I put that into guitar playing or drawing specifically, training in a concentrated way, how much better would I be? How much value could I actually give to somebody instead of like a funny meme or whatever that is going to be presented and forgotten in almost the exact same amount of time?
Yeah, that's a very excellent way of putting it. For no, there's for I think a lot of us have started to devalue our time.
Yeah, I think
Like
we don't even notice, right? Like
well,
that's like the insidious part is
and
that
it's
we
not
don't
just
notice.
it's not just social media either too. It's just like the concept of binge watching and having like my wife and I, we've seen The Office front to back I don't know how many times, and still most weeknights it's replaying on a channel and we throw it on and we get sucked into episodes we've seen 10, 15 times literally. And it's like as at some point, yeah, you need to kind of a disconnect from the world sometimes, but other times it's like
I would say that doesn't strike me as bad inherently, unless there's something else you'd rather be doing, and you don't do it out of inertia.
Well, yeah,
I think like when you see something like The Office, or like my buddy whose name is also Ben Brocious, who's been my closest friend probably since I was 3 years old. He keeps rewatching Fury Road because every time he gets something new and interesting out of it, and a good piece of art or cultural artifact, I think does bear rewatching in this way that you get rewarded. It's not, you're revisiting it because it has value. You're not escaping to it inherently because you're scared of the unknown. And, like there's not that FOMO, to use the acronym that you were saying you don't like. I think that there's something to that, but also just like trying to think about like what is the reason why we're doing this. Like my wife and I do the same thing, and she talks about how she does want to play guitar so we can play music together. But I think you get to the end of the day and you're so tired because you tend to have this work experience where it's not ideal for anybody, because as we're finding out, everything is precarious anyway, that you get to the end of the day and you're like, well, I just want to be relaxed. I don't want to challenge myself. I don't want to push my brain. And I understand that impulse too. I'm not better than anybody.
Yeah, I understand the comfort aspect and the rewatching something, getting something new from it every time. But I think more often than not, speaking for myself, it just kind of becomes an easy way to turn off my brain when I know I should be challenging it more. For myself, and I know for you as well, having more than one creative outlet, having art, having music, there's always something to make.
Yeah.
There's always that riff idea. There's always that, one little picking pattern that you're like, oh, I gotta tweak that a bit more. Or is that one little melody line you gotta fix? Or is that, that one little story you gotta flesh out? Or those, that thing that's been in the back of your brain forever? Or that piece of fan art you want to draw but you don't have time for? Or the, all these things. And so, speaking specifically for myself, it's when I do that and I get sucked into a show. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that was like an hour and a half that I could at least been sketching out this idea, noodling on my guitar, things like that.
I do think about that too, but I think that when you add the complication of, well, I'm in a relationship with this person. So some of that downtime where you're sharing a bonding experience, even if it's one you've done a bunch of times before, is reinforcing this, bond of love, which is not, I think I saw maybe Kelly Sudaconic posted this thing. It's like, it's not a state of perpetual enthusiasm. So you have to craft moments that you're spending together that help maintain and build that intimacy. And so I struggle with the balance of it too. It's like, do I want to spend an hour with my wife watching a television show where we're both just relaxing together and sharing that experience that we'll probably talk about and have even more opportunity for bonding later, or do I want to act like some sort of guitar or art monk and, demand it of myself that I improve? And I think that there's a balance to be struck by looking at targeting specific things. So when you get a guitar in your hands, or when you get a sketch pad or your iPad or whatever you're working on, you do dedicated practice in this way that helps you with specific goals. And that way you're not wasting any of the time you do have, and you still get the benefit of the human experience that you have with the people around you. So, I don't know if that's helpful too, but that's the way that I think of it now, especially as I get older.
No, and, I've been married for, going on 11 years now.
Yeah.
And been with my wife together. We've been together since, 1999.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's 21 years, but we've learned that, you have to make that time to relax together.
Yeah.
And, when I talk about seeing the same episodes of The Office or Brooklyn Nine-Nine over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
it's different than when we just, binged Lock and Key over a few days.
Right.
Because that's a new thing that we were both excited about and we can talk about. But it gets to the point where I know for myself, it's kind of like there's not a real, it's just more like we're both vegging out situation.
Yeah. Have you ever
And
heard
then you
of
throw
this?
in,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah. And then, from my end of things, we also have to throw in the fact that we have kids.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, it's also like, I could, it may be a little misleading to say we just sit there and watch The Office. It's not, our daughter's playing and we're interacting with her and my, infant son, he needs his attention and all that. But it's just kind of like the, I guess it's more for on my end where I don't have an 8-hour gap in my day to be like, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to work.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I got about a half hour. Everyone's occupied. Let me try to do this. And then at the end of the night, it's like, if I'm not too exhausted, it's like, all right, I can get a few hours of work in now. Granted, that's just my own personal experience.
It's super difficult. And when I meet people who say, well, I want to break into comics, I want to do this job, I tend to think it's not impossible to do it, but the more you look around at the people who have that gig, a lot of it is luck and timing and community. And so if you are lucky enough to be at a skill level where you get to be part of a community, and then that community makes opportunities available for you, and you're ready to seize them and you take advantage of that. I was reading this article in my most recent Guitar Player magazine that I got in the mail about this lady who plays for Lizzo and Melissa Etheridge. I forget what her name is because I was just reading it, and she's unfamiliar to me. But she's only been playing guitar for 6 years, and she's playing with all these people. And she just was in the position to take advantage of it. She had the right skills, and then she's essentially getting paid to get better. And that's how I feel about my experience becoming a professional comic book artist. I was a later start than a lot of people, but that's because I lived in Cleveland where I did not have a community of professionals who could steer me in the right direction. And then I got to Portland and I worked for about 3 years doing random jobs before I met Steve Lieber, and he invited me down to Helioscope to do stuff. And even then I took extra time because I thought he was just being nice. And so it is one of those things where I totally am appreciative of where people are at, how much luck plays a part of it, and how hard it must be if you've already got parts of your life established to be in a position to switch it and then do a different job that requires a ton of energy and intention, and it's really hard. I can barely do it now, and I don't have any kids. And I think about people who have multiples. I'm like, man, how do you get anything done? Brian Chirilla has multiple kids, and Jeff Parker has multiple kids, and it's just, man, it must be like a marathon every day.
I can tell you from my limited experience, there's not a real healthy way to do it. The thing, at my point in my life, I got back into drawing late. I had like a 10-year gap in between like high school and like my mid-20s from drawing.
Yeah.
And so when I got back into drawing, I was basically starting from like when I was like 16 level.
Yeah.
And from there, but at that point, I still had, I wasn't really a kid anymore, though. I still had a full-time job. I had like a 3-hour commute every day. I had all these factors that, like, I fought against so long that, like, at this point in my life, after, starting to make comics or starting to draw for like the past 10 years again,
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's something I love doing. It's something I'm going to keep doing until the day I die.
Yeah.
But the idea of it being a full-on career, I don't see that as, oh, that's a definite road I'm going down. It's more like, that'd be nice if I can swing it, but, I can't, hinge. I can't spend for my particular case. I thanks to social media, and one of the positive aspects is I've got to meet a lot of great people. There's a lot of great communities I've been able to be a part of, and groups, and I know there's a support system there. It's just, for me, I know there's a time thing to where being able to get things done, being able to improve myself to a certain level, and then even then, it's like, well, am I improving myself in this manner to appease this company or this particular set of skills, and is it not to do what I want to do?
See, I think this is the tricky part.
That's what really I struggled with for a while.
Yeah, trying to help people achieve the thing they want to achieve in their artistic pursuits is always tricky, because there are things I think that are objectively worth knowing about the process of making comic book illustration, or trying to communicate visually, if you want to be more broad about it, right? So like, there's stuff that I wish I had known when I was 19 about how do you work in a sketchbook? How do you, what kind of things do you want to do? It's sort of, I think of it as like the difference between, when like some celebrity has to get super fit to play, I guess like Chris Hemsworth to be Thor, or Kumail Nanjiani to be in the Eternals. It's like, they know that there's a person who can point to them in the right direction. Be like, all right, you want to look like a superhero? Here are the 20 things you have to do, and you got to do them every day, and you got to do them even when you don't feel like it. That is all stuff that if I had known when I was 19, I'd be a much better artist today. And I look at people who I can tell have internalized certain specific information because they've practiced it. And like when you start looking at things like style and approach and storytelling, it becomes so broad for a lot of people that they don't know what to focus on. So they just keep making the same choices over and over again. And I can look at someone's drawing and say, I'm pretty sure what you're trying to go for. Here are the things that I would recommend. But then, who knows if they would like what I do enough to value my opinion. And I try with portfolio reviews and things like that to give people advice, but it's sort of like you talk to a trainer one time, and then that trainer's like, well, eat more green things, do some timed interval exercises and get back to me. Like you're not working with that person consistently enough to see the improvement, or to reorient your focus in a way that will get you where you want to be, if you only interact with them in fits and starts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I've seen a little bit of this happen, and I gather that's kind of like the general vibe at your studio Helioscope, that it's kind of like mentorship / just like a little like your own hive to kind of really reflect what you're doing off of each other and kind of help each other grow, because you're all there. Or at least, you're there interacting with each other enough, seeing what people are doing, what they're struggling with. Because if if you're interacting with someone long enough and consistently enough, you can kind of see where they have their ebbs and flows.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, like, I'll give you some behind the curtain insight on that. So, like, first of all, I will say it might be different than my experience with it, because I bought a house about 4 years ago, and when I did, I was not able to go into the studio anymore. So, effectively, around the time that they switched the name to Helioscope, I had to start working from home. So I go in there occasionally. I'm still close with some of the people from the studio, but my experience with Helioscope is more like a social club where you're sort of habituating yourself to interacting with other professionals. But in terms of teaching, I would say the real nexus of information that I got was from Steve Lieber occasionally Colleen Coover, and or with rare exceptions, a handful of other people. But it is not the type of place where there is a clear plan for educating young artists. And part of the reason that I ended up leaving the studio wasn't because like somebody was mean to me or whatever, but I just realized like I had different ideas about how the mentorship program should go, and when I voiced them, there were people who did not agree with me because they wanted it to be more free form. But I honestly feel like if you're going to do a thing where you try and bring people on board and educate them to some extent to help them prep for the future, there are good basic standard things that everybody needs to know. And like that's why ultimately, if I'm going to do that, I have to make my own curriculum, and I can't impose it on the studio. It's not, they're not obligated to listen to me. But I do feel like I notice problems in a lot of people's artwork if they're trying to tell a story. And typically it comes down to like, are they intermingling shorthands that they learned from somebody else? Or are they trying to come up with a combination of systems and observation that will give their drawing charm, communicative potential, and the right balance of symbolism and realism? And that is a hard thing to communicate, but I also think it's necessary if you want somebody to get to their full potential as an illustrator. And maybe people don't understand what I mean, but like if you look at Stuart Immonen, you can tell there's a combination of observed information, where he's looking at a photograph, or he's posing for reference, or he's drawn enough from nature that he understands how light works. And then there are other things like abstractions in his drawing, where he's communicating motion with a line. Daniel Warren Johnson does this a lot, James Herron does it a lot. And comics lives in this weird netherworld between observed information that we all understand, and then new vocabulary that comes out of abstraction. And abstraction is a very strange and uniquely human thing, from what I can tell, where we take symbolic language in an intense way. We look at it because we have a whole section of our brain, I forget what it's called, Broca's area, I think is what it's called, where we're interpreting, in many cases it's speech, but we do this with other things too, visual information, symbolic pictograms, things like that. So if you want to be a great artist, I think it helps to understand how the human brain works, how much emphasis you want to put on a thing like drawing realistically, and then what advantages come from cartooning or abstracting the shapes that you're working with. And the middle ground for me, the ultimate expression of this is Stuart Immonen. I think he's probably the best comic book artist I've ever seen in my life.
I am very much inclined to agree with you. He's definitely got that where you can. I feel like I'm just going to keep repeating what you're saying, like in a simplified version for myself. But because I agree with you. It's and it's something I know. Again, I don't want to like talk about myself a lot on these things because
it's not my intent. That's our frame of reference, right?
But that's something that the shorthand aspect is something I've struggled with a lot, because I tell myself a lot, like the shorthands that I try to use or want to use, I feel like these are ones, they should be developed by me. These are what I've developed by constantly doing this and seeing and saying, this is how I think this should be. And I've, said a few times before, like I kind of missed that period in drawing where I was directly copying somebody. Mm-hmm. Like I never did that. And I kind of feel like I missed something with, going down that road and then being like, okay, I'm kind of done drawing like this person. Yeah. I'm kind of forming what I'm doing. And now I'm just kind of like forming my art Voltron with things I'm still learning, still trying to pick up. And, there's times where it's like I try to be really clean and really focused, and it's almost uncomfortable for me.
That's the problem, right? Is like getting to a point where you feel confident. Like Steve Lieber has said to me many, many times, negative space is a positive element. And I always think yeah, he's right. And then I'll look at some drawing I did, and I've just filled the frame out of anxiety. I want people to know I can draw, right? But then you look back at these drawings, and they're so chock full of stuff. There's no place for the eye to go. But if you look at somebody like Chris Samnee, like who I think is also, he's a contemporary master. I love his artwork so much, and his storytelling he's got every base you can imagine. He's got them all. Everything you would want: charm, grace, innovation, intelligence, communicative potential. It's all there. Everything he does. He's like a savant. But you look at his stuff, and it's like, this is a guy who has figured out how to do the right set of abstractions. Everything you're looking at is clearly communicated. There's atmosphere there. But he's also, from what I can tell, very comfortable in his own skin. The choices that he makes, his style, style is a word that I always think is loaded.
Yeah.
I like to describe it, as saying like a combination of tics and homage you can't get rid of. It's just going to be there no matter what.
Well, it's kind of like what Neil Adams said. A style is the things you do wrong.
Well, I don't think it's just the stuff you do wrong.
Well,
I think it's the stuff you do right, and it's this weird blend of all those things, right? And so but I think the part that gets missed in that conversation that's worth thinking about the most is, what is the context that you're trying to achieve? And my brother Gabe and I talk about this when we talk about musical gear, or when you're playing on stage. Like, everybody knows exactly, what they think they're going to need. And then you get up on stage, and it is a totally different deal than sitting in your bedroom and playing. Where, like, okay, yeah, I thought that you could play, a Fender Telecaster through a Vox AC30, and it would sound just like Brian May. But then you get up on stage, and it sounds weak and tinny, and you start to learn what you need based on the context of what you're doing. Or if your guitar playing is not where you need it to be, it shouldn't be in comparison to somebody like Joe Satriani or Tom Quayle, or one of these people who's just a monster. It's like, well, that guy has the tools he needs to express the thing he wants to express. What do you want to express? If you know that is the question that people should be asking themselves constantly. What am I trying to do? A college friend of mine put it really succinctly when he said, to what end? Ask yourself that question. To what end? Why am I doing this mark making? If you know the answer to that, it will go a long way to helping you be confident in your choice making. And I'm trying to do this all the time, whether it's my guitar playing or my speech or my drawing. I always want to know, what's the goal? Am I trying to make craft videos for kids? Am I trying to make, draw a human being that feels more charming than the stuff I usually do? If you know that question, if you can pose that to yourself, it will help you avoid unnecessary flailing and bad practice habits and other stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a hole I find myself going down. Like, when I'm drawing something, what is the point of this drawing? And I felt a lot like you feel sometimes, where it's like, I've seen Steve Lieber tweet about this a lot, just the whole, like, the negative space thing, and you kind of only need to make sure you have detailed back if you're trying to establish where people are in a thing.
Yes.
And it feels like cheating when you don't, but then when you don't do it, and you can kind of step back and objectively look at what you're doing, and it feels right, you kind of feel almost foolish for like all the other times you just slap line after line after line.
I'll flip it on you, and ask you, what is it about your drawing that you, in an ideal world, what would you like to be able to do better if you were being an honest critic of yourself, and you look at your stuff and you think, what do I do well? What could I do better?
When it comes to what do I do well, I always struggle with that, because I try to, I think it's important to recognize things you can do well. And it's really difficult for me to pin something like that on my art. Like, I've gotten compliments on my storytelling, which is it's great. And, but being told, to me, it sometimes feels like when someone's like, oh, your storytelling is really good, it kind of feels like they're saying, oh yeah, Don, he's got a great personality, but it's one of those things where, but I should, also be like, they could have just said nothing. They could have just, or they could have, commented on something I did that wasn't clear or whatever. I feel like I have my moments where I do some, if I go heavy with the blacks at the right moment, or if I get certain, I guess, moods or things like that. And that's actually really something I'm trying to play with my current projects, is just kind of letting my art go where it needs to go, and I'm just trying to do it to the best of my ability that I have at the moment. I definitely want to work on my dynamic figures and things like that, because I always struggle with do I want to be more of a realistic type thing, or do I want to be more exaggerated? And that's the fine line of comics, right? Like, either you're someone who's, like a Somni, who's, very realistic in proportions and things like that, or you're someone who's like Brian Level, who's doing these like giant figures and these big hands and these things like that, and it all works with what they're doing. It's just kind of finding out what am I comfortable doing and what direction do I want to take. And unfortunately, that's a question that I can't really answer consistently for myself.
Yeah, I mean that one's harder than like what do I wish I was better at?
Yeah.
Because I think we all on some level know that this is a part of the dynamic of the things we craft. And sometimes people dwell on that question more than they should, and it's not helpful.
I should have just said hands. Hands.
Yeah, it's sort of like what we were talking about in the beginning of the podcast, where we were talking about genre and evaluating the stuff. It's like a lot of it is contextual. It's not relativistic, really, because I think at the end of the day, what we want is there to be clear potential for communication. We want to enjoy looking at the thing we're looking at, and some of that is objective, but there are underlying, neuroanatomical things that help us guide our choice making. Like we can imagine a thing that was total chaos that made zero sense, and then we can slowly move towards a thing that is so structured that it lacks all charm, and somewhere in the middle is what we want. And that's also why I love looking at Stuart Eminem's work so much, is because he can do something like moving pictures where the characters are highly abstracted, but everything is intentional. Or he can do stuff like his Fear Itself arc, and that stuff is just exquisite, and it looks like if Alphonse Mucha drew comics, through the filter of rock and roll. It's just incredible. The guy's an unbelievable talent.
Yeah.
Like, some of me wonders, like, how did you get him to work in mainstream comics for as long as he did? He should be on some mountaintop conjuring, esoteric dragon monsters out of clouds. I don't know. He's like a wizard.
He actually many years ago, when Challengers Comics in Chicago, they had an art gallery attached to their store. Now it's a beautiful kids section that's amazing, but at the time it was an art gallery, and they had Stuart in, and he had his original pages on the wall, and I'm just like looking at these things, and every page I move over to look at the next one, and it's a different story, it's a different style, but it's done like it's done to the best possible way I could imagine someone doing that style or that story.
Yeah.
And Stuart's like one of those guys who's so good that you don't necessarily get like jealous, or like you're just soaking it in. That's all you're really doing.
Right. It's like you've come upon a beautiful waterfall in the midst of nature, and you're just astonished by it.
Yeah.
I actually think that this is a thing that it's not that there's one ideal for me, right? Because
definitely not.
Like he is my favorite, but then I look at people like Lucy Knisley or Kate Beaton, and I think they have found this voice that expresses exactly what they want to express. And I went up to Lucy Knisley at one point at some convention. I was like, I think you're really great, and like not everybody can do what you do and distill complex information down to simple line work, and I just think you're great. I think I was worried that it came across as me trying to tell her what her art was about, but I was just wanting to express I think she's a master level cartoonist, and both in the way that she talk about good storytelling, she's masterful at it. Now she can't technically draw at the same level as Stuart Immonen, but she doesn't have to, right? It's like when who is a better songwriter, Joe Satriani or Tom Petty? Where it's like, well, it kind of depends on what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want something that's down to earth, feels organic, and you can put on, and lots of people can enjoy it, well, Tom Petty. And Lucy Knisley is like a Tom Petty. Like, I want to know human experiences, and I want to revel in it and enjoy it and go with her on these ups and downs of her daily life. And then sometimes I just want to watch somebody pull off a fucking amazing guitar solo with whammy bar tricks and all this stuff, and that's Stuart Immonen. So you can have all these great things, but the common thread is that they know what they're trying to express, and they express it at the peak of human powers in the current context, right? Like, you could see this in somebody like Winsor McKay doing his Gertie the Dinosaur stuff, or Claire Hummel doing costume design. They're just like astonishingly good people everywhere. And I think the mistake is looking at their stuff and thinking like, oh, I wish I could do that, without the context of the thing you want to create as the frame around which you structure your choice making,
No, yeah, I completely agree. It's when I think that kind of like feeds into a lot of my confusion artistically, is that I have all these people whose art I absolutely adore, and they can't be more different from each other. It's like, if you asked me, in 1 hour, like, who do you want to draw like right now? I'm gonna be like Adam Kubert. And then the next hour, like, who do you want to draw like? I'm like Bill Sienkiewicz. Like, And it's like we're I'm in the process of it now. I've started figuring that out for myself. Yeah. But it's still like this, just trying to like push all these influences through the cheesecloth, and kind of seeing what I got left. And
well, just in terms of unsolicited advice, what I would say is find people whose stuff you like, ask them for targeted negative feedback about what you do, but also peppered with things they think you do well, right? So like, if you want to improve, give yourself a project, and then ask people who you respect to evaluate what you do in the context of that project. Because, anybody who looks at your stuff, they're going to, half the time, offer their opinion. And it's going to be highly filtered through their own biases and set of intentions they have for themselves. But if you say, I'm trying to draw this project where, I want the women to look appealing and attractive, I want the men to look, strong and stoic, how am I doing with that? That gives somebody something to work with, and then if they offer you some nonsense piece of suggestion like your storytelling is good or your storytelling could be better, then I try and do this with people too. We're like, all right, drill down. What is an example of somebody who draws a person with charm? What is an example of using lighting appropriately? And I think that's a thing that I try and do for myself a lot, because I want to get to a point where I'm feeling confident in the stuff I work on. And I will say, like, having worked on the Fantastic Four thing I just did, and then doing Beasts of Burden just like one after another, has made me more confident in what I want to do better. And, I'm not flailing around in the same way that I was in my early part of my career, where I'm trying to figure stuff out and, falsely confident in some things, and try and take a really honest assessment of where I'm actually at with my abilities.
No, that's a really great kind of spin to take these types of things, where, I've often, told myself that I kind of want to get myself to the point to where if I'm not doing something the way people think it should be done, that I want it to come across like, well, I intended it to be that way, not that I did it wrong. Yeah. And I think, taking the idea of targeted context, for your feedback, I think that's probably something that should be probably more beneficial to people than just, here's 5 pages of Spider-Man busting up a bank robbery. what did I do wrong?
Right. Yeah, like I've had so many critiques I've tried to offer people, and I can tell when they're not writing anything down and when they're just staring at me blankly, like they've never heard anybody say anything to them like the stuff I'm saying to them. I'm like, oh, so did you just bring me this so I could say positive things about what you're doing, or do you really want to get better? Because there is a huge gap between people who perform at a professional level and people who have this aspiration but have done zero training to get to that point. And fully 90% of the people whose stuff I see or more is not at a point where it's publishable. It's like in some places it's close, but if the same person keeps showing up and they keep doing cross-hatching and they don't know why, and I've told them a bunch of times, like, you got to stop doing that. If you're going to draw a robot, try and think about the abstraction of how light plays on metal versus how it plays on cloth. It's like if you're looking at a chair fabric and you put cross-hatching on a chair that's, got some kind of heavy woven fabric as the thing that it's composed of, then sure, that makes sense. But I see people borrowing the shorthands of other people all the time, whether it's cross-hatching or people trying to use Sean Murphy technique of the thumbprints, or people trying to do speed lines like James Herron or Atomo or somebody like that, and they don't know why. It's not, they're just looking at it. It's like if you hear, Eddie Van Halen playing tapping, or you see Meshuggah plays an 8-string guitar, the guys in that band, and they're like, oh yeah, I need an 8-string guitar. I'm like, for what?
Yeah.
What reason do you need to do this thing? If you're just doing it because you think you can borrow it from somebody else, you're missing the point. Like, the point is the context of the choice you're making, And so, like, my own things I will say that I practice, or I try and practice now, are how do you draw a charming human face without reference? And like the secret to it is get to a point where you draw a lot of people from reference, and then you try and build up tools in your head where you think like, all right, how far apart should the eyes be? What does it look like? How many lines can I draw the face in before it starts to look old? Mm-hmm. If I draw too many, does it tip it over the scales? How do I scale that back? And then build that into your sketchbook practice. And just like you're playing guitar, as listen to this guy Tom Quayle, who's a really great guitar player, talk about how he's like, one thing people get wrong all the time is just the way their fingertips hit the fretboard. Or if they have lazy technique, if they're not touching their fingers to the fretboard like a ballerina would touch her toes to the ground, then they're going to have these sloppy passages and they won't be able to play fluidly. He's like, so just focus on your fingertips. Do that for a little while. And it seems so elementary, but then once you realize you haven't been doing it, if you're trying to draw the human face but you don't understand the structure of the skull underneath, the facial features are going to float all over the place. So you need to work on these really specific things that feel elementary, or like a lot of people talk themselves into, but they don't know how to do. And I definitely feel like I talked myself into thinking I could do some stuff that I couldn't do.
That's some really great advice I think everyone should really take. And don't be surprised if I send you an email anytime soon with like, Ben, tear me apart. Here's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, man, I'm happy to, because like I've definitely had people do that for me. And Steve Lieber is the guy who he'll say, oh, that's your comic series is boring, or it's not funny. And like, oh man, it breaks my heart, but he's right. And I trust Steve because he's honest. And that's another thing people sometimes encounter is like they'll talk to people they trust, and if you can tell this person is honest with you and they're giving you a solid critique that is not colored by their affection for you, then in the future when they tell you something positive, you can trust their opinion because they didn't hold back when you asked them for negative stuff. Mm-hmm. And I always try and color it with what I think somebody's doing well, so they don't throw out the baby with the bathwater of trying to improve. But generally, it doesn't tend to work that way. The stuff that's good tends to stick around. It makes it, like you put it, through the cheesecloth. Yeah. Like you catch the right stuff, and then the stuff you don't need gets pressed out. And so, I probably should make some videos where I share my own practices and my own drawbacks.
I would definitely like and subscribe to that series.
Yeah.
To kind of take it back a little bit to something we were talking about earlier, but reframe it with I would be remiss if we didn't have a little bit more discussion about music, because you're a fantastic musician.
Sure.
It's something that, I'm constantly surprised with the fact that comics people are, so many of us are musicians, and different types of musicians. And, it's really kind of fun and inspiring to see other people having that kind of dual creativity, dual outlet thing. And you kind of mentioned earlier where, taking like doing something to like what's the purpose, right? What's the point?
Yeah.
What's the end game here? And I feel like with music, I can do that for myself. Like oh, you know what? There's a solo bit I have in my head. I don't know how to do this, but I know what I want, so I can direct myself to do that. Like it's a lot clearer for me with music. Do you find that true for yourself, or because I think maybe music is, I guess, in the fact that there's more right notes than wrong notes, I guess.
I think like I was saying earlier, I think there's a contextual thing, right? So like there are ways in which you can tell there are kind of common universal appealing things. That's why you hear the 1-4-5 minor 6 chord progression in a zillion pop songs, because there's a satisfying harmonic structure to that has to do with the way that we hear wavelengths and a bunch of other things. Some of it is just like contextualized, bits of information. But I think that there's something to be said for like the immediacy of music, where like it sort of floats away once you've heard the note, so you're not lingering with a bad note the way you are with a stroke on a page, right? Like it's like if a page is this record of something made over space-time that then has a permanent record, of what you did in this span of time, then an album is is probably the closest thing comparably to like you making a comic book. And man, like you've probably done more recording than I have, even if like just in your home studio. But my band went into the studio right before things got bad with the spread of the coronavirus, and that is a hard look in the mirror. So I think it depends on the context. Or like my sense of freedom is sort of contingent on whether or not I make a thing I'm going to share with people, or if I'm just playing music in my house.
Recording yourself is incredibly humbling.
Yes. It's like working out without your clothes on in the mirror.
Yeah, that is astute. One-to-one comparison as I can even imagine. Because
you're exactly as fit as the mirror is showing you, and the recording process is like, oh yeah, you think you can pull off this lick, and maybe live you can because there's enough distortion and adrenaline or whatever.
There's enough delay being pumped where that little flub doesn't really get caught.
Right, but do it to a click track in the studio where it needs to be pristine, and it shows you what you are genuinely capable of. And I think that there are people who hear those kind of things and they get frustrated, and then there are other people who hear those things and see it as an opportunity to rededicate themselves and focus differently on what they've been doing. And so I think that to answer your earlier question, if I can, is like the back and forth between those two different things, it gives me the freedom to feel varying levels of confidence depending on what I'm doing, right? And so like I don't ever get too down on my drawing because I can go pick up my guitar, and I don't ever get too down on my guitar playing because I can go draw, and generally I can make something I don't hate. And I think it's a tremendous gift to be in a position where we're able to continue to do these things, because I see people who get some bad diagnosis, like they've got ALS, or they've got limited feeling in their hands, or they're getting older and they can't function the way they used to. And I always think about those people and think like, all right, well, I'm lucky. Right now everything works, I can keep getting better, and no matter how frustrated I am with this particular thing, there's somebody who can't do this at all and wishes they could. Like both my hands work, let's do this.
Yeah, because if my right hand got lopped off tomorrow, like there's stuff I would I do, but like, yeah, I would definitely put a gigantic halt on figuring
there's
out.
a guy who a contemporary thinker I like a lot, and he can be a controversial person, but usually I think because people misunderstand the context of the stuff he's saying. His name is Sam Harris, and he taught me this idea of like, just present yourself with a counterfactual, and it helps reframe whatever experience you have. Oh, you're mad at your wife because she's slamming the dishes around, and you're trying to play your guitar for a recording. It's like, just imagine, the next day, if something were to happen to her and she were just to disappear, you would look back on that moment and your anger at that thing and find it absurd. You'd want to spend every minute you possibly could if you knew that the next day you wouldn't have this person or this thing in your life. And so whenever I start to get frustrated, I try and reframe the experience I'm having through that lens that I learned from Sam Harris, and just imagine, like, this is a person I love, this is the thing I love to do. I'm going to focus on it and make the best of this moment that I can, and try to imbue it with a positive energy that I know is a larger part of my psyche than whatever minor frustration I'm having at the second that I'm experiencing it.
That's definitely something I have experience with myself, and I can tell you that there's no greater teacher for something like that than having kids, because there's so many days you're frustrated. So, not to go too deep into it, but when my daughter was born, she was born a couple months early, so she spent just over a month in the NICU, and thankfully she was healthy throughout the whole time.
Yeah.
But there were other little kids there who weren't, and the constant context of what you're feeling and anger, and like, there's a different aspect of another way to look at it too, because you also have to like validate how you're feeling in that type of scenario.
Right.
You can't just dismiss it by saying someone else has it worse, but it does help kind of from there.
Yeah,
it does kind of put
reframes the emotion,
because there's been times where, and then not to get too heavy about it, but I've been incredibly frustrated with just not a good day with the kids and all that.
Right.
And then I stop, and just this thought comes to my brain like, well, there's parents who didn't get to bring their baby home at all, and they would kill to have this bad day.
Absolutely, man. It's like, that's my two friends have a daughter who just got through the gauntlet of her last treatment for leukemia. And she got diagnosed when she was 2.
Poor
She's
thing.
now 4 or 5. I think she just hit her 5th birthday. And man, I talked to my friend about it, and I said, man, like, you're so courageous. Like, anytime I'm having a bad day, I think about you and my other friend, his wife, and I think, these are the people who, they're so brave. And he said, I think the same thing about the people in the treatment protocols who didn't get to have this day where they experienced the end of treatment.
Yeah.
They're either still going through it or it didn't work. And like, the mystery of our existence and the luckiness we have, it comes with this offset side that it's like, it's good to meditate on it. It's not great to dwell on it, and it's not great to live in this space where you allow it to rule you. So I think it is a balance, right? Like, it's like you said, you want to be able to feel that emotion and experience it, but we tend to perpetuate it for longer than it has to exist, because it's this like poking a sore spot in your gums with your tongue. Like, you keep feeling it, and then you remind yourself of how angry you are, or you remind yourself of how sad you are. And sometimes that is like this recursive loop where you never get out of it, or it takes a long time to get out of it, and then you're not actually helping yourself. So I try and allow for it for as long as I feel like it's helpful. And just like we were talking about earlier, examine the contents of your own mind and your own psyche, and try and preserve the things that are valuable, and push past the things that are actually holding you back from developing.
Yeah, it's real important to have these kind of touchstones for yourself to kind of pull yourself out of these things. And it's even gotten at some points where I literally just have to tell myself, like, all right, you have like 2 more hours to mope, and then you're done. Because and most of the time it works, because life has a way of, keeping you on your toes in all kinds of ways.
Absolutely.
So, I've loved this discussion we've had so far, and you've touched on some really nice, great, deep things. I do kind of want to end on a little bit of a lighter note. So before that,
I don't want to bump people out.
We're gonna go even lighter, and we got some questions from Twitter for you.
Okay.
Now they're fun questions, but I was hoping we'd have a few more, I guess, thought-provoking questions. Not to insult anybody's.
I feel like we got pretty deep into some stuff.
But you know what? I think we've covered deep this episode.
Yeah.
So first off is from the lovely Jared Jones.
He's great.
He wants to know if you were born with it, or is it Maybelline?
Well, I'll tell you what. It's a little bit of both. I found out, and I'll cover like this experience I've had with having long hair, which is probably not exactly what he asked about, but man, my hair started growing out, I think like right before we moved out of our apartment. And so I've been growing it for a long time, and it like, you can either look like Cousin It, or it can look pretty good. And it only looks pretty good because my wife got me this like cleansing conditioner. So if you're a person who has super thick hair and it's out of control, get cleansing conditioner. It will be a game changer. That's the Maybelline part.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those people who has like super thick, oily hair to like almost like a ridiculous degree.
Try
this, like, once I started using like clarifying stuff, like I felt like so much, like it's kind of ridiculous. Like when my hair is longer, like I buzzed my head a couple weeks ago because I was just tired of dealing with hair.
Oh man, yeah. I did that when I first moved to Portland. I shaved my head bald, like down to like whatever it was, an eighth of an inch or something, and it was so satisfying. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't have to deal with anything. I hop in the shower. It's like a 2-minute experience.
Yeah.
And now it's a whole ordeal, and I gotta dry my hair and a bunch of stuff. But sure, it's fun to have in the band.
When my hair's longer, when I had the undercut and all that, and it was getting pretty long, like I was the guy who was like, I go get my hair cut, and I would actually ask them to thin my hair.
Yeah.
Because it was just so like, and I'm sure there's some guys out there who are not so fortunate with the hair, who are probably shaking their fists at us, but it's like, once you start using that clarifying stuff. So if you have thick, heavy hair, use clarifying, cleansing stuff. Like that hardcore stuff, because not all of us need help with conditioning it, but we definitely have, we definitely get the grease head.
I think we just launched our new podcast, Hair Care Tips with Don and Ben. So there you go.
It's going to be a YouTube channel.
That's right.
We're going to, I'm going to grow my hair out, so expect it in about a year. And then, does your hair grow fast?
I think so, but I don't know.
It seems like a random question, but it's just like, I get a lot of comments from whenever I get my hair cut or from my wife about how just my hair grows like a weed, and it's just like I'm like it's not that fast, but it's also like
it might be apocryphal, but I heard that your fingernails and hair grow at the same rate. My fingernails grow really fast, so.
And a lot of that's determined with vitamins and stuff, and how well you're taking care of yourself on top of that as well.
We took Jared's question in some weird directions there.
Okay, so speaking of hair care, Brian Chirilla, love you, Brian. I'm just messing with you. He wants to know, how does he stop sucking and get good like you? And let's preface this with, Brian is an amazing cartoonist, comic book illustrator in his very own right, and he is downplaying his own abilities drastically.
That's the funny thing, is like Brian is awesome. I think I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, that like he's a guy who he has his own approach to drawing. It's super solid. The context of all the lines he makes feel like well informed, and there's a grace to them. He's also a hell of a guitar player, and he seems like a really good dad, and I like his opinions on almost everything from what I can tell. And I think he rules. And it's funny because when I first got into comics, he was one of the first people to like offer me a chance to try out for a job, and I don't think I was up to snuff, but he's really nice to me, and he's been nice to me ever since. And I think he's a great guy, and comics is lucky to have him. They don't deserve him maybe, but they're lucky to have him.
No, Brian's great, and I really wish he would post more guitar and bass videos.
Well, there you go. You've
don't
called
just
him out.
don't just DM them to me, buddy. Like, the world needs to hear some of that thunder.
Yeah, I want to hear some Chirilla full-on songs.
Yeah, that. I have this pipe dream of like just throwing an EP together, of just getting all these different comic book people doing things, and because I'm like, oh man, how great would it be to have like a song where like I'm playing guitar, I get Brian on bass, we can get like Ben to do like some fucking wicked solos, and then I can get
who you need to sing it is Layla Del Duca. She's great.
Well, there you go. I was thinking Anthony Johnson, but that's okay. He's got his own little.
Oh, sure.
He's got his own like Motorhead specific type growl. Is what I was going for in my brain. But no, again, there you go. Though, so another comic book artist, musician.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's awesome at everything. Layla's great.
Next question we have is from the lovely Jeff Parker, and he wants to know when is Ben going to develop his own board game?
I have developed 2 or 3 of my own board games, just not finished them. And the hard part is like getting people to play test it with you, because like just imagine trying to explain the rules of a board game that's already made to your family, and how much people get frustrated at that. That's the part people hate. And so then imagine the rules aren't set, and you're trying to help develop the rules with the help of people who also don't know what the hell is happening. So that is what developing a board game is like. You're trying to cut out the fat. You're trying to make sure it functions. You're trying to invent these abstract tools. So I've made a couple. One is called Ready, Set, Blast Off, and it's a space adventure game. And then another one was about endangered forest animals. And then I had some card game that came to me in a dream that was like Avengers Assemble. It was a memory-based game, but I can't make a card game about the Avengers. I don't want to get sued. So that's my answer for Jeff.
Awesome. Board games is always one of those things like, my wife and I would definitely want to like get into and have like game nights with people. We just don't have the community around us or the people around us to like really kind of do something like that. So hopefully when the kids get older, we can drag them like play games with mom and dad. Put down that hologram video game.
Right.
And our final question is from Leland Purvis. He wants to know, when is Ben going to get out tools and make his own guitar?
So I made a guitar when I was, let's say, I think I was 20. I might have been 21. I don't remember exactly, but I made it, I think it was 21. I made a guitar for a girl I was dating at the time. She didn't ask me to. I made a lap steel. And she might still have it. I don't know if, where it is in the world, but it was a fun process. It was cool to like take the tools and shape stuff and buy the parts and figure out how to do the scale length. And I painted it and I carved stuff into the top. And I think if I were to get to a point where I felt solid enough in my comics career that I wasn't constantly scrambling and jumping from one ice flow to another, I would take the time to build some cigar box guitars and make those available to people. Because it is a thing that I sometimes think about. I think, like I'm no Leland Purvis. He's the type of guy who I think he told me about how he made a bed for his daughter where he used like wood pin construction. He's the kind of guy who can figure out how to do, him and Jonathan Case. Oh man, those guys they feel like real life Ron Swansons in some ways. You're like, what the hell, man? Yeah, Leland is a brilliant guy. He can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, woodworking and stuff like that, it's something, being a homeowner on a budget is definitely something I've grown more accustomed to. And
absolutely.
And I feel like if I had the time and I invested in some more of the tools, I'd probably be able to make some pretty nice stuff. Like I'm building a desk for my wife, and it's coming out really great. But, time. I just don't have time to go, and then winter came, and, I don't have a workshop that's like got temperature control and all that.
Yeah.
So, but I have, on my end, I've been assembling a kit guitar of sorts. I bought a Flying V body, and I wanted to make something I'm calling the Cosmic Riffage. And it's basically, it's painted white, and I'm inking on all the Kirby cosmic dots all over it.
Oh, nice.
And then I have the thing about making guitars, like I always want to make my own guitar, like, you know, and it's something we really didn't get into in terms of like types of guitars, but I'm definitely, you know, like, let's mod something, let's fix something, let's, you know, shine this thing up. And, you know, the thing that scares me most about making a guitar would be the neck.
Yeah,
that seems like just
that's the tricky part, right? It's like this is why, like, for the most part, I'm definitely a plug and play type of guy. I like to get a guitar that's exactly the way I want it from the go, and I like to play it more than I like the idea of crafting them. I like the idea of messing around with something like cigar box guitars or making a left slide guitar or whatever else like that. But yeah, my preference. My brother is a guitar builder, and he hasn't done as much of it as he'd like, but. He has built like a full acoustic and steaming the sides and whatever else. He's built his own electrics from some kits, and he does repair at Portland Music Company. His name is Gabe, and he's also an aspiring comics colorist. But he's like the type of dude who likes to monkey with all his gear and switch pickups out and paint this and do this and do, you know, change the knobs. And I'm very much like, I just want the thing exactly the way I want it from the get-go. I don't like to add salt and pepper to my eggs. I like to, you know, like, I don't put cream in my coffee. I just go straight for it.
So,
it's like my Les Paul is exactly the way I want it.
We've kind of had this a couple interactions about this. You're very much a guy who likes his Gibsons, and
yes.
So, you know, back, you know, a few years ago, I want to say 5 years ago, I got back into playing guitar again after a few years. Even though I think of myself as a bass player because that's where I started. That's what I played mostly.
Okay.
But it's mostly guitar now. And that's when I started recording and, you know, seeing how bad I really was and things like that. And and just to bring up something previously before, you know, one thing I did learn about recording myself, and we talked about kind of like taking, like, thinking things sound good or these are the things you need. First thing I learned really fast in recording guitar is playing your guitar by yourself, the tone you have when you're recording, you got this nice big thick tone, and then when you double track it and then you throw the bass on there, you got a flubby mess of bullshit. So, you know, that's kind of like, that's actually something I've learned that I've kind of like tried to approach, you know, my comic art with. So if that can help anybody recording wise or whatever, you know, because everything I do is digital. Like, I don't have any actual amps.
There's such a huge difference between what you think is going to function and like in principle, and then in practice, what do you want to do? Because, like, I noticed as we were in the studio, and I didn't get to do all that much in terms of crafting tones, but playing my Gibson through Les Paul through the Marshall that I use on stage, and we could not get a good sound with it for a really long time. And we tried dialing some stuff in, and like, I'm not the kind of person who is such a purist about my gear that I think it's got to be my stuff. I'll use whatever is available. So if it makes a better sound to play through a tiny Fender Harvard cranked to the max, that's awesome. You know, but yeah, like I'm not a purist. I just want to make a thing that sounds good, and context is a big part of it. You know, to cycle it back to what we're talking about with drawing, it's like, you need to know what the goal is you're trying to achieve. If you know that, it helps take a lot of the guesswork out of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And some underlying practice in the process will help you get there faster. You know, like, so you're constantly like proposing these questions for yourself and then answering them. And sometimes you're not there yet. And then that question and answer period helps you get to the point where you can more fluidly set up a dynamic where you can, you know, maybe not stumble as much.
Yeah. And so I greatly appreciate the amount of time you've given me tonight. If you can bear with me for a little bit, I have 2 more questions, and then I will release you back to, you know, creating more beautiful stuff for this world.
Thank you.
First question is, so when I started playing again, you know, I wanted an electric guitar, and I was really drawn to the Telecaster shape. And after doing a lot of research, I ended up buying a Squier John 5 Telecaster.
Okay.
And then I got it, I liked it, but it wasn't right.
Yeah.
Something just felt off. So I bought a Dimebucker bridge pickup to put in there.
Okay.
So I slightly modded it, whatever. I changed the pick guard, and then, I started, going back to playing in drop C tuning, which is kind of like where I felt most comfortable and all that. And then one day I was just kind of playing, and I'm like, it just really felt like the guitar felt like me and an extension of what I was doing. Even if I was just doing, simple riffing or whatever, it felt so comfortable and so right within me as this being my mode of expression. I was wondering, do you have that guitar, or do you have like multiples of that guitar, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was playing more regularly and taking it serious, a thing I might do as a profession, I had, some acoustic guitars that I used that were like that, and some National resonator guitars, and I still have them. I have two Model Ds, which is not a model they make anymore, but they're dobro style wooden body guitars with a spider bridge resonator, and then I have a Style O that I use, and I put a pickup in it that's made by, I forget, some company, but it's called a Hot Plate, and it's designed after this thing. This guy Mike Dowell, this blues player, developed it. And right before I stopped playing, I put this pickup in there, and it would have been so much easier when I was playing out more to use that. But I use that. Right now I have, my Les Paul is a 2004, I think, Honeyburst Standard Plus, and I love it. I know it's got some wonky aspects to it, like it buzzes at the 12th fret a little bit, but I feel really comfortable with it. And when I play in band context, almost nothing else comes close. I did just buy myself, after I sold an issue of Autumn Lands completely, to buy this guitar that was at my favorite shop. They sold it the day before before the deal closed.
I remember seeing that on Twitter, and I felt so bad for you. I was like,
I'm so bummed out. But then I saw this thing on Reverb. I was just like sort of in my pity for myself, browsing Reverb, and I saw this guy has this Pelham Blue SG, and he's in the Portland area. I'm just going to contact him and see if he'll let me meet up with him. And we met up, and he had an awesome collection of all these Gibsons. And I was like, why are you getting rid of this? And he's like, well, I got other SGs, and I don't really need it, and should go to somebody who will play it more. I was like, perfect, I will play it. And so I have this new Pelham SG 61 standard, and I want to put a Vibromate Bigsby on it. But that's the only mod that I want to do to it, because I want to have a Gibson that has a vibrato system specifically for the purpose of playing certain songs in my band. And I think it'll be nice to have the two to switch back and forth. I'd love to. There was a double neck that my friend Paul let me borrow, that is amazing guitar. He collects vintage Ibanez guitars, and he let me borrow it for like 9 months. And man, I would love to have the set neck Ibanez double neck of my own that had the 6 and 12 combo, because there's other songs in the band that I want to use the 12 for, and then be able to switch to the 6. And so, yeah, Paul is he's a well-known guitar player, and I try and now practice this thing to make any guitar pick up. He calls it turning it invincible, and I'm trying to learn how to do that with a lot of my 5 and 6 note groupings, Eric Johnson-y kind of stuff.
Cool.
But anything that sounds good on, I feel pretty confident about.
Awesome. So I mentioned this with Dave Jordan last episode, and I create music for my comics.
Cool.
I create soundtracks.
Yeah.
And I did it for Pax of the Low Country. I did like 40 minutes of like synth and guitars and all that kind of stuff. And then for this current project, Emissary, I'm really, I'm doing it again. I'm going to have like 5 or 6 songs by the time it's all done. And it's something that I think creating music for my comics, it's never not going to happen. If it's from me, I feel it's so intertwined in how I express myself that I don't see it never happening. But I'm wondering, is that ever something that you would be doing? something that you would be interested
Yeah,
in
you
doing?
know, first of all, I want to say a shout out to Dave because Dave's a buddy of mine, and I think he's great. And I love that he has like basically thrown himself into the deep end of comics and is drawing more and more all the time. That's awesome. Like when I first met him, it was at Rose City, I'm pretty sure, a bunch of years ago, and he wasn't doing it to the extent he's doing it now. But I'm super excited to see him do it. I was going to do this project with a friend of mine, Jeremy Barlow, who's a great writer and a really nice guy. He was the original frontman for the band I'm in now, but we just had some internal conflicts between some people, and he ended up leaving the band with another guitar player. They both left. But we were going to do a project that originally was going to involve, you know, some fun online components and a lot of rock guitar and whatever else, and that spiraled out into our band. And the thing that I'm thinking about revisiting, and I don't know, when I'll have the time, but I guess everybody's in lockdown, so we all have time now. I might revisit this concept I did when I was teaching kids about 10 years ago that was just in my sketchbook, and I didn't really have a place to put it. But it's this little robots fighting comic, and that's all it is. And I would want to do it in this place that had, like little moving GIFs, maybe in some instances, with some little accompanying riffs or clips of sound. And I started making craft videos for kids, and I just played some dobro underneath what I was doing to try it and see if I could get it to work. So there's plenty of context where I think I can use my music. I haven't yet seen the perfect fusion of music and comics done. I know a lot of people have tried it. I know Daniel Warren Johnson did it with Murder Hawk.
Murder Falcon. Yeah, he did his own soundtrack for that, and that was really cool because he kind of did.
Yeah.
He kind of did like a different style of metal for each song.
He's great. He's great at everything, from what I can tell, and he's a really nice guy. He also loves Pacific Rim, as you probably know.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm definitely going to try to find a way to get Daniel to give me some of his time to get on the show as well.
Yeah, man. Like he's this guy who I think, like, I just talked about him on another podcast I did where like he's blowing up, and I totally see it, because there's a handful of people who come along at the right time where there's a particular type of drawing comics, and then there's either one person or a group of people who just break the whole thing open in this way that feels very liberating, and I think he's one of those people.
Yeah, definitely. It's really kind of nuts. Because I remember I met Daniel. He was still doing Space Mullet, and I met him at Challengers, and he had a Space Mullet pin, and I'm like, oh, hey, are you Daniel Warren Johnson? And he was like, so like, what? And I'm like, oh, we talked on Twitter a little bit. He's like, oh, and now he's Daniel Warren Johnson.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah, I think that's the great thing about comics, is that like everybody is just some person, right? Like at any given moment, and I think that what we're experiencing right now with the quarantine and everybody being locked in is you can see celebrities just sort of puttering around their house, and without the context of the glamour and the lighting and the makeup and all the things that make people look idealized, you realize like everybody's just doing their thing. They're all just trying to get through the world and function, and you support each other on one level or another. And we make the mistake of elevating some people above others, and there are extraordinary people in the world. There's no doubt about that. But they have human emotions. They have human needs, and life is this finite, precious thing. And if we make the point of focusing on those, tragic parts and the joyful parts, and embrace the truth of the existence we are fortunate and enough to have, and also be cursed with at the same time, and live in that dichotomy, I think it allows us to find that full extent of our humanity, that in a way that like my hero Carl Sagan, I think, expressed really beautifully throughout the process of making Cosmos and all the books he wrote. Like, he was a guy who had a zest for life, but also didn't shy away from the hard aspects of reality. And like I know that's a weird departure from being like, yeah, Daniel is just a guy like us, but I think it's a helpful thing to emerge from realizing like everybody's just trying to go through it, and some people are famous for a little bit, and some people blow up, and others are great and they don't, and it's crazy roll the cosmic dice in some cases why some people have a moment and others don't.
For sure. And I think this is a great spot to put a cap in this. If there's anything you would like to, promote or talk about, you mentioned you're doing videos for, showing kids how to do certain crafts and stuff while they're, being stuck in the house. And
yeah, I mean, it's a thing. I've just done one
creativity.
so far. I'm going to try and do another one tomorrow, but it's just called Do Something, DEW something. And you can find it on my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Benjamin Dewey. And, I'm on Twitter, and for all the caveats that we offered earlier, I do think it can be a good place to connect if you're careful about how you use it. And so you can find me there as Benjamin Dewey. I'm also on Instagram because I'm an artist trying to make my way in the world and make sure people don't forget I exist. So you just Google Benjamin Dewey, you'll find me and my comics and other things of that nature. And, if you see me at a convention, if conventions are a thing ever again in the future, bring your portfolio, write stuff down. I'm happy to talk about comics and life and science and almost anything.
All right, Ben. Well, thank you for being so generous with your time. And, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Don. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and I hope everybody will revel in the coffee, metal, and comics they've got at home during this troubling but also inspiring time.
Cannot be better put than that. All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again for listening to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast.